All right, welcome to our next workshop in Humanities and Fine Arts, Made in HFA series. We are talking about interviews today. So interviewing with confidence. We want to look like this guy after we've gone through our interview process. Um, I have a lot of content that I have in this presentation today. So if you have questions, I'm gonna make sure that I have the chat box open here. If you have questions, you put it in the chat box. And we're recording so that those of you that can't make us today can be watching it in your own time. So what are we covering today? So this is what we're generally going to go over. We're covering it all. Okay. This is going to have a lot of information in it. We're not going to talk about the resume, right? Because if you saw in our previous workshops, we talked about resumes. If you didn't see it, it's recorded and it will be on our or maybe already on our website to check that out under the Student Success Studio in HFA. But what does that mean? Like what is that next step? We created our resume, we submitted our resume. Now, how do we prep for that interview? Because we haven't gotten the job yet. We have to get through that interview process. We're going to talk about how do we research an organization. We'll talk about interview questions, both common questions and behavioral interviewing questions. And then we'll talk a little bit about how do you follow up with a thank you after the interview, which is very important and yes, can stand you apart from other candidates to get that job. And if we have time, we'll talk a little bit about negotiations because that definitely may be a part of, well, depending on what the situation is, we'll go into that. But that could be a part of your being offered the position and then a negotiations could happen. So we could talk about why would you even negotiate, right? Because we don't have a lot of practice in that at this time in our right. If we're a student and we're going to school, we probably haven't had practice in negotiations. So we'll touch on that. Okay, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide because we talk about it in our resumes. These are the top 8 competencies that U.S. employers seek. Okay, this is from the National Association of Colleges and Employers. This is also in our career handbook that's found on our website. I'll show you where to find that on our next slide. Notice that these are all transferable skills: work ethic, problem solving, oral written communication, digital technology, leadership, global intercultural fluency, right? How well do you work with other perspectives, culture, sex, gender, religion, age, right? Career management is how well do you know yourself, right? And this is so important when you're going into an interview. So if you miss the resume workshop, I encourage you to watch that because you'll have a better understanding of where you've used these transferable skills in your experiences. You'll have an example of where you've demonstrated it. This really helps in the interview process. Okay, so just this is more of a reminder. We're going to go to the next slide because we're not going to focus on these too much because you can find all that content in the previous workshop. So what do we do before the interview? Well, you have to have your resume, right? We have a career handbook that has resume samples on it. You can find it on our website, csuchico.edu/careers, or just in that search engine on the Chico State website, search for Career Center. So on our main website there, we have the career handbook tile, opens up a PDF. And we have resume samples in here, resume guidelines. We have cover letter guidelines. We also have interview question content that we'll go over also. So this is a key resource for you to utilize and refer back to because a lot of the information that I'm going to be talking about today can be found back in that content or on our website. So the other thing for that pre-interview is practice, right? And now these are kind of some interesting pictures. The Zoom thing fits perfectly in the sense that you can meet one-on-one with your career advisor in our Career Center, both now as a student and also as an alumni. You get free services in our Career Center for life for free. We don't charge you for those. Practice with us. It's just you and I, or your career advisor of your college. I am the liaison for HFA. So if you have an HFA major, you would be coming to see me. We spend a whole hour to do a practice interview with you, right? And it's not recorded and nobody else is watching. It's just a great opportunity to get some feedback on how you can enhance your answers and get an understanding of what employers are looking for in the questions they may ask you, right? You can also practice in your own time, and this may feel a little awkward, but sit in front of a mirror and have an interview with yourself. And it feels awkward, but so does being in an interview, right? So putting yourself in that kind of uncomfortable, talking to yourself in the mirror can give you also that feeling of being in an uncomfortable seat, because being in an interview for the most part can give us that feeling. But come and see us in the Career Center. I've seen students' confidence boost so much, even just after one session. But I have students that will even come back for a second practice interview to continue that confidence. So when it's time for the real thing, you're feeling a lot more confident walking into it, because you're better understanding the value that you're bringing, right? We also want to talk about dress, right? Your attire, what are you wearing? Now, even in the virtual world, if you have a virtual interview, it's still very important, right? At least head, shoulders up, right? Of what you're wearing. And in the virtual world, we're also looking at our background. So we want kind of a background that's not distracting. The attire, we want to make sure that we're keeping it really simple. We don't want to, we want to make sure that it fits. We don't want clothing that's too baggy or too tight. And then we want something that's comfortable, right? Especially if and when, and for some industries, we're in person doing this interview. Gosh, you want to be comfortable sitting there, because it's already an uncomfortable situation having to talk about yourself with complete strangers for the most part. The most important thing is we don't want your clothing to be distracting, right? So it's okay. You can kind of see in some of these pictures, like there's a checkered tie, there's a little pop of color with a blazer. It's better to kind of overdress, right? You may be wearing something in an interview that you wouldn't typically wear maybe in that job, but it's best to kind of make that first best impression, and then once you have the job, then you change your attire for that position, right? The other thing that is super important is we want to give ourselves some time. So we don't want to be late, because again, that increases our anxiety when we're going into that interview that already can create some of that. So give yourself some time. If it's in person, show up early, give yourself an extra 30 minutes, an extra hour to find that parking, right? To find the building that you need to go to, that little extra time to go to the bathroom or get a drink before you go in, and just, take a moment for yourself to remind you how awesome you are before you go into that interview. Something that I also encourage students to do, especially if they're feeling super anxious with that interview process, because we all have a different level of that kind of nervousness, I should say. But once you arrive kind of, for the interview, before you go into the building, have somebody close to you, whether it's your best friend, whether it's your partner. You could have a parent. I feel like it's a little bit, brings a little more value when it comes from your friend, but have them talk to them before you go on your interview, and have them remind you how amazing you are, right? Because those people that are surrounded by us in that support network are very quick to point out what makes you, right? Your strengths and why you're so amazing. And just hearing that, a little pep talk right before you go in, again, can increase your confidence, to go in and then share that with the employer, right? Of how amazing you are. So show up on time. This is also in the virtual world. Like, enter into that room or enter in that platform ahead of time. Make sure that all your electronics are set up, that your headphones are working, right, that your camera's working. So give yourself time for any technical issues that may arise. And I just lost my train of thought for a second, but and also have other forms of communication. So if there is technical issues, can you send them an email? Do you have a phone number that you can call to let them know, hey, I'm having troubles getting into the platform that we have our interview in, so that you can get further assistance. All right, so we're going to go into researching the organization. This is one of the most important parts of the interview, right? So, and hopefully you've done this when you're doing your resume and you're applying for the position. But you really need to understand who you're talking to, right? Who is your audience? So when you're researching the organization, here are some things that you need to know. You need to know, what type of organization are they? Are they a for-profit? Are they a nonprofit? What kind of products or services do they provide? What are the qualities, right? What are their values or their mission statement? Those are pretty common on all company websites. What's the size of the organization? Do they have multiple locations, like multiple sites? Read back through that job description. I really encourage, when you find a job that you're applying to, save that job description, right? Because by the time you're going to interview for it, that job description is probably no longer available online to see. So make sure that you have that available so you can review that again. What type of candidate are they looking for? And so you can speak to those qualifications, okay? It'll make a lot more sense here and when we're talking about common questions that if you don't understand the organization and you haven't researched them, it's going to be really difficult to answer some common questions in the interview process. Where can we find this information? Now, the organization's website, right? That's kind of the common one. Sometimes it's at the top. Sometimes you have to scroll all the way to the very bottom of their website, and they usually have like an About Us section. So you can look about us. It's typical they have the missions and values, but look around, because state agencies or larger companies will have reports. They'll have their annual report, like, this is what happened last year, right? They might even have what their future company goals are. Click into all of those documents, because you're really going to get a lot of content. And you can use that in the interview. Like, oh, actually, I checked out the CEO report that you have on your website, and it says that you did X, Y, and Z, and that you'll be doing this next year. How would I be a part of that, right, if I were to get this job? So that really shows the company that you did your research, that this does mean something to you, and you see how you fit into what they're all about. Now, you can go to the organization's website, but you can also just Google them, right? So we can go online. They might be mentioned in a news story, right? Maybe they're the top 10, employer on the West Coast to, I would do whatever. I'm not really sure. But again, we can use that content in an interview. Oh, I saw that you were mentioned in a newspaper article recently, right? Former or current employees. I really encourage students to utilize LinkedIn to network in this way, so they can find people who work for the company, who are maybe in a similar role to what you're applying to, or you can reach out and say, hey, especially alumni, right? Hey, I see that you're a Chico State alumni. I'm applying for a position that's very similar to yours. How do you like working for the company, right? And so we can get a little bit more insight. It's also really great if you really know somebody there and you can name drop, like, oh, I spoke to Katie about your company. She's been working with you for 10 years and she had nothing but nice things to say, right? And I worked with Katie previously, or however you may know that person. So that can also really help. Questions so far, and you can use the chat box to put your questions in. Okay, I think we're good to go. Okay, so The next thing, right, that we're going to lean into are the actual questions, right? So these are just a few questions. Some of these are going to be just the most common questions that you may be asked. The other part that we're going to talk about is just the general structure of how to answer certain questions. And once you understand what skills you have and where you've used them, remember, go watch that research workshop if you want to review what that looks like, because that's really going to help you to bring really clear and concise examples to the employer of where you demonstrate your skill and how that translates to this job, right? So in our career handbook, after the resume and the cover letter kind of guidelines, further towards the back of the handbook are interview guidelines. So a lot of this content is in there. We also have additional content on our website, on Career Center website, for questions that we can't fit into one page, right? So let's talk about some general questions. The very first question that is usually asked, and it can be asked in most ways, but most commonly is asked, is tell me about yourself, right? And so this is a big question, and it can feel a little overwhelming because we don't always know where to go with it. Like, well, what do they really want me to know? And I think for the most part, we know that, right? They kind of want to know who you are and why you're there for this job, but then how do you go about it? The other way, as long as we kind of know how to answer this, you can also answer it if they were to say something like, why should we hire you? Right? So this is where you need to know your value and what you bring to the table. For these positions, the tell me about yourself, or like why you over these other candidates that we're going to be choosing, I use the resume as a foundation, right? So hi, my name is, because our name's at the top, right? Hi, my name is, I'm currently getting my bachelor's in, so we talk about our education, some of experience that I have that's relevant to this position, and then we talk through some of the experiences, right? Additionally, I've held some leadership positions. Here's some leadership positions, right? So we're just picking, we're not word for word going through our resume, but that's a good foundation to stay on track with what they're looking for. Some things that are not on your resume that you can kind of include in that answer. Most importantly, we can all add, now what, right? What is the goal? So here, who we are, we're getting this education. Here's some relevant coursework or relevant experiences that we have. And now this opportunity that your company has will, is on the direct path of my goal to be X, Y, and Z. So now you're making that connection of here's who I am, here's where I'm going, and here's how you're going to help me get to where I want to be, right? So you're making this really nice connection with them. And then that feels really good for the employer because they see how you value them. The other part that you can include, and not everybody has this, but is that pre-story. So I don't know, let's say that you are wanting to go into teaching, right? And well, before, right, you even had a resume, before you even went to your education, maybe your pre-story is, I come from a family of teachers. My mother's a teacher, my father's a teacher, my grandfather was a teacher, my great grandfather was a teacher. I come from a line of teachers, and I've been inspired by teachers. I've had an opportunity to be in the classroom and observe teachers. And I know that this is what I want to do, right? So I chose to go to Chico State, and I'm getting my teaching credentials. Here's some relevant experience I have, right? So there's this pre-story that some people have that kind of paints a better picture of this path that you even started to go on. Two other questions. These are pretty similar, again, with how you can answer it, but why are you interested in the job? Now, as we were talking about before, you have to know what the job is even about, right? Know the job description, know the organization. And you can't really get around answering what do you know about our organization if you don't know about their organization, right? So that's why researching is so important. to be able to answer these type of questions and make that connection, you to what they're looking for, right? And you need to make those, connect the dots essentially. These ones are kind of tricky. And I love going over these in a practice interview. So just a reminder, you can come and have a practice interview with me, and we can iron these out for the position that you may be applying to. Or if you don't have a position yet, but you just want to start practicing, that's fine too. Typically an employer will say, like, tell me your greatest strength. When I'm doing a practice interview, I ask students, tell me 3 of your greatest strengths, because I want to make sure that you know how amazing you are. And I think it's really hard for us to identify that. So typically when I say, tell me 3 of your greatest strengths, I get a lot of, right? It's kind of like, I don't know what to say about myself. And that's a big problem, because we need you to know, right, those strengths so that you can, what we would call, professionally brag about your skills and your strengths. So when we're talking about strengths, if this is really hard for you to identify what your strengths are, think about, you can ask somebody else, right? You can ask your friend, hey, what would you say my greatest strengths are? You can also think about, I like the question, like, what would your previous supervisor say were your greatest strengths? Sometimes it's easier to think in another perspective, right? If you've ever had a performance evaluation because of an experience that you've gone through, a work experience or volunteer experience, what did they say in your evaluation? Because typically there's a lot of positive that comes from that, especially in the work environment. So there are ways that we can kind of brainstorm what those strengths are. We also want to know, even pull out those strengths, because we probably have like 10, 20, 50 strengths. But if we want to highlight the strengths that are most relevant to the job, that can bring more value, right? What is your greatest weakness? This is a tricky question. It's not my favorite, but I have been asked this a lot when it comes to interviews. I like to reframe this question. Instead of what is your greatest weakness, think of it as, what skill do you want to be better developed in? And what are you doing? What actions are you taking right now to be better developed in that, right? And we kind of want to avoid, like, oh, I'm a procrastinator. Like, let's not talk about that. But really think about those skills. So if you've started learning about how to use InDesign or Photoshop, for example, you've started to use a certain program, but you know that you could be more developed in that, and that it's very relevant for the position. It could be where you say, well, something that I want to be more developed in or be better at is InDesign. I've utilized InDesign in one of my projects that I had in one of my courses last semester. I really enjoyed using the program, but I want to know more. I want to be more proficient in the program. So what I'm doing right now is I'm taking this course on LinkedIn Learning so I can be more proficient in that program, because I know it brings value to this industry, right, that I'm going into. That's just like an example, right? So we want to know what it is that you want to be more developed in, but I want to know, as an employer, what are you doing to better yourself in that? I want to go back to those greatest strengths, because, sorry, I'm bouncing around just a little bit, but I talked a little bit about being very clear and concise. Those are very important to remember, clear and concise. When we're talking about a strength or your strengths, we want to be careful not to just list them, right? Like, oh, I work really well with people. I have great communication, and I'm a team player, right? The employer is not going to remember that when they've interviewed 10 other people after you. A way to really paint the picture for the employer so they remember you and the skills that you bring or the strengths that you bring, is by saying, one of my greatest strengths is I'm a leader. An example of where I demonstrate my leadership is I was a vice president of our design club last semester, or currently a vice president of the design club. And as that role, I'm required to, and then you could talk about those leadership skills, right? Or, I see, I'm kind of brainstorming these strengths now. I demonstrate excellent teamwork. I work really well in a team environment. An example where I've demonstrated this is I've played soccer for the last 4 years, and it's very important that I'm communicating with my team members so that we can, reach a common goal, right? To win. And in fact, we won state. Right? So you kind of bring this clear and concise example. So after you leave the interview, and as the employer, I've interviewed a couple more candidates, I think, you know what though? I remember Katie because she talked about being a soccer. She played soccer for 4 years. I played soccer. I remember that, right? So you're making a memorable moment for that employer to be able to stand out from other candidates. So use a clear and concise example, right, of where you demonstrate that strength, right? Or use a clear and concise example of how you're better developing that skill set that may be seen as a weakness, right? Or it's not a skill set that you want to be more developed in. Now, the last common question is, do you have any questions for us? Right. We're going to go into a couple behavioral interviewing here in a second, because that's a different type of question that can be asked in an interview. But this is the other common question. Please do not leave the interview saying that you have no questions for them. Because what that shows the employer is that, A, you probably didn't do your research about the organization to have anything to ask. Or maybe that you're just not really interested in this position. It doesn't show that you're motivated or passionate about it because you don't want to know more. So in our handbook, we do have a list of questions that you could ask. You will find more specific questions to ask if you're doing your research on the organization. If an organization says we do a 6-week training for all new employees, but there's no details about what that training is, and you saw that on their website, now in the interview you say, hey, while I was looking at the content on your website, it says that you do training for new employees that's 6 weeks long. Can you tell me more details about what that looks like? What type of training do you offer, right? Shows that you did your research, shows that you're interested, and you're going to get more details about what your first 6 weeks are going to look like, right, in a training. So know that there's an advantage for you to gain more information to know if this is going to be a good fit for you too, because essentially you're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you to know that this is a good fit. The other questions that I want to go over, so if there's any questions about these common questions, or what questions that you may ask an employer, please put those in the chat. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. And I'm going to go into what we call behavioral interviewing. And now this is very important because it will happen. You'll have these questions. But hopefully, knowing this foundation, the STAR foundation, will help you to be most prepared in answering these questions. So when I say behavioral interviewing questions, again, these are also in our handbook. What I'm talking about is they typically will start with, tell me an example when, describe a situation when, right? Tell me a time when. They want an example. They want you to explain a situation, paint a picture for them, but it's to ultimately know that you have a skill that they're trying to look for. So I have a couple of examples that hopefully it makes a little bit more sense. So what does STAR stand for? We want to make sure that you are So this is like, for example, tell me a time that you resolved a conflict with a coworker or customer. Like, that's a pretty common one. Situation, like, who are you? Where were you? Right? Were you an intern, at Cave? Were you were you a food server at LaSalle's? Were you a babysitter for a local family? Right? Who were you? Right? So we want to paint the picture, and then what were you tasked with? Right? So I was a food server at LaSalle's, and we had a long line of customers waiting to get in, and no tables available, right? So painting the picture of who you are and like, what were you situated with, right? What were you tasked with? Now, the A is really important, and you need to take your time with it, but what actions did you take in that situation, right? So if you were the food server at LaSalle's and there was a long line and there were no tables left over, then what actions did you take for a positive result or outcome, right? So maybe the actions that you took is that you spoke to your supervisor to see if we could open up the back room, because there was an extra room. You open up the back room because it wasn't being utilized, so we could get more customers in. And as a result, we were able to seat 10 tables right away, and we increased our sales by 10%. I don't know. And then we had happy customers. We want to know what that result, that positive outcome is, because that's going to stick with the employer, right? And I keep using the name Katie. I don't know why. But, no, I remember interviewing Katie because she was talking about when she was a food server, right? And there was a long line, and it showed that she was really creative with opening up another room. And as a result, her customers were happy. And that's what we want for our company too. We need somebody like that. Right? So it paints a picture for the employer, and it sets you apart from the candidates. So here's some other examples here. And what I would encourage you to do is list out skills. So we talked about those top 8 competencies at the beginning of this. In our handbook, we have a list of additional skills on page 3. Attention to detail, flexibility, computer software programming, listing out the skills that you have, and then next to that skill, like attention to detail, think about like, where in your experience have you used attention to detail? And then just put like a bullet point, right? Like employee payroll at Target. I don't know, right? Because that will help you to connect the dots of your strengths, the skills that you have, and your value, but where you've demonstrated it. And that's going to be really important with these questions. It's hard to think about those examples on the spot. So that's kind of like your pre-homework. That's what you want to do ahead of time. Here's an example. Share an example of a time when you faced a difficult problem at work. How did you solve this problem? Now, what I want students to ask themselves when they hear this, share an example, tell me a time when, right? They start hearing this behavioral questioning happening. Ask yourself, what skill do they want to know I have? Right? And it's very clear here that they want to know that you know how to solve a problem, right? So solving a problem, right? Problem solving is a skill, but what's a clear and concise example of where you've used it? So here's an example. This is on Indeed Career Guide. I pulled for some examples. I was working as a retail manager at a department store during prom season, right? The situation and the task is painting the picture of where you're at. A customer purchased a dress online and had it delivered to the store. One of my associates accidentally put the dress out on the floor, where another customer immediately purchased it. Before calling the customer to let her know about the mistake, I located the same dress at another store. So this is the actions. Located another address at another store location nearby. I ordered it to be pressed and delivered to her home the morning of prom, along with a gift card to thank her for her understanding. Those are the actions. Here's the result. The customer was so thankful, she wrote us a 5-star review on several review sites. Whoa. Hey, do you remember when we spoke to Katie? They got a 5-star review because she went through all those steps to make sure that the customer was happy, right? Because of a mistake that had happened. And it shows them how you problem solved. What did you go and do to solve that problem? Okay, we'll do another example here. Tell me about a mistake you've made and how you handled it, right? We all make mistakes. And so, you know, how do you handle it? So think of a time where you've made that mistake, but then what actions did you take to make it right? So here's an example. I was working as an intern for an events company, and I was responsible for ordering the floral arrangements for a private event hosted by a high-profile client. Unfortunately, I mixed up the information from another event, and the flowers were delivered to the wrong venue on the other side of town. So painted the picture of what's going on. Here are the actions. I admitted my mistake to my boss, took an early lunch break, drove to the other venue, picked up the flowers, and delivered them to the appropriate venue an hour before the event. Here's the result. The client never knew about my mix-up, and my boss was very grateful, right? So this is what the employer is listening for, and this is how you make a really good impression in your interview to be remembered, because you're not the only one that's most likely being interviewed for that position, okay? These are things that we practice in our practice interviews with the Career Center, and we're completely available for you whenever you want to do that. If you have any questions, put them in the chat box there. Ooh, got a question. How do you recommend remembering all of this information? Research of the organization, things about myself. When I go into interviews, even now, I forget everything I spent time preparing for. Yeah, you know what? It's a great question. And I'm throwing a lot of information at you, primarily because I want it just to be out there for you. It takes practice. So what I would recommend, come and do a practice interview with us, because remembering the things about yourself, it's more about knowing yourself. Right? So it takes practice and it takes some reflection to really know what value we have and how it can be applied somewhere, right? So sometimes that just takes some time to understand, yes, I communicate well. Okay, well, where? So let's talk about that. Where do you communicate well? Like I have excellent time management. Okay, where? Well, I turn all of my assignments in on time. I've never had a late assignment ever. And I've had 100% attendance at work, always. I've never missed a day of work in my life, right? Like those are the things that we start to brainstorm about. And as you start to recognize that, you're not having to think about that so much because you know it for yourself. The other thing that I'm glad that you asked this question, because the other thing that you can do in an interview is you can bring a little notebook, right? So I've got a little notebook down here. Maybe I put some like little bullet points on my notebook. This is completely okay. Like those questions to employers, write them on a piece of paper. And if you're in an interview online and they say, do you have any questions for us? You say, oh, actually I do. I wrote down a couple of questions here that I wanted to ask you. Right? Well, you just came prepared. So you can have content written down. I would not advise you to write out a dialogue. We don't want you to be reading the dialogue. But if you had on your notebook that you had something like, attention to detail, and then right next to it, it just said payroll when working at Target, you'll know what that is, right? You'll be like, oh, attention to detail. Actually, when I was working at Target, I was responsible for payroll, and it required a lot of attention to detail to make sure that, right, and you kind of go in. So we have to kind of find what works for you. But part of just writing that out and putting those examples and connecting it to a skill also just helps you best prepare, and you're just going to better understand yourself and where your skills are used. So it's practice. It's about practice, but it's also doing that homework ahead of time, right? It's almost like studying for a test. And you just have to make sure that you're restudying yourself, what your worth is, and how it translates to that job. It's a good question. I encourage you to come to the Career Center and do a practice interview. And we can definitely talk about some more tips for you for sure. Any other questions, just throw them in there and we'll get to them. Okay, so we've had the interview. Let's just talk a little bit about what that looks like for after the interview. Send a thank you. This has gotten me a job in the past. They literally were trying to decide between two candidates. And I found out later, after I was hired, my supervisor shared with me that it was a very close call, but because I reached out and sent a thank you, that was the reason why they ended up choosing me, because I went a little above and beyond and took the time to do that. Thank yous are really important for a couple different reasons. First of all, like what do we even include in them? So they can be really, really brief. This is not a page-long thing. This is just a really quick thank you for your time. Some things that you can do is include maybe where you met. So, if it were in person, maybe you're at a career fair, you met them there, they've probably met 200 other people, but maybe in your conversation, you both discover that you have a common interest. Okay? Take note, like, hey, this is Katie. We met at the career fair, and we're talking about, our I don't know what it is, but you got to pick out like that common interest that you had with that person or something that you talked about. I was the one wearing that bright green dress you commented on, or I don't know. You can pick out something that was really unique that you were talking about. You can reinstate like your interest in the job or the position. Like, it was really nice to meet you. I'm really excited about the opportunity that your company is offering and will be putting in my application, right? That's maybe like a thank you. If you met somebody at a career fair and they're saying, hey, you should apply, then you should thank them for showing that to you. If you've gone through an interview, then you're reiterating like, thank you for your time, to interview me. This is, a really unique opportunity and I look forward to hearing from you. So I was kind of doing a, how do you thank someone when you meet at a career fair, when you thank someone after an interview, right? And that's where the questions that you ask the employer, right? So that training, right? I noticed on your website that you offer 6-week training for your employees. Can you give me some more details on that? Now you've gained insight that the other candidates don't have, because they may not have asked that question. Maybe that's something that you use in your thank you. I'm really impressed by the training opportunities that you provide your new employees. I see a lot of value in that. I really look forward to hearing from you. Thank you for your time to interview me, right? Just really short and simple. But here's what it does. We can do this via like an email right now in this virtual world. Email is the most appropriate. You can also, if it's in person, have a card. Like, when you're done, you can even go to your car, go find a little quiet area, write your card out. You may come back and give it to the person at the front desk and just say, hey, can you give this to the interview committee? Or, hey, can you hand this off to the hiring manager? Or hopefully you remember their name. And you can give the handwritten card to them. The other thing that you could do, so we want to send the note immediately after, right? Whatever medium is going to be best fit for what that looks like for you. If you are very interested in this job, you want to devote this extra time to do this. It also, you can follow up with a handwritten note, right? So if you send the email, because maybe it's electronic and you want to get it like right away, but if there's an opportunity to follow up with a handwritten note, or, acknowledging like, that you'd already sent the email, this is something else that you can do, because we never get handwritten notes anymore, right? That seems like a thing of the past. So if you actually have something handwritten, it really shows that person took extra time. The other thing, not only is it thoughtful and can make a great impression, it also shows your name one more time, right? They saw your name on the application. They saw your name on the resume. You came to the interview. So they've seen your name and they've met you now, and then they're seeing your name on a thank you note, right? It's just that another opportunity to get your name seen one more time. Okay. So please thank the individuals that are providing you that interview and taking time because they see something in you, right? It could be pure happenstance that they're not able to offer you that position, but they appreciated everything that you did so much that they have this other opportunity that they want to provide for you, right? And there are companies that will do that. They see, you may not be the best fit for this position, but we really like you and we see your value. How about this, right? Let's start you here. So that it can go a long ways. We have a little bit of time. I think I'm just going to show this rule. I think we've got a little bit of time. This was kind of my last slide that I wanted to go through. I told you I had a lot of information, but know that you know where to find me. I'm in the Career Center. And we could definitely revisit some of this one-on-one if you need to. If you get, when you get the offer, I should say, when you get the offer, right? You have room for negotiation. Now, this all depends on who, what, where, why, right? When. You need to have an understanding of why you would negotiate, but this is something that you should keep in mind. If somebody provides you an offer, that there's no reason why you can't ask for more if it's needed. So why would we even ask or do negotiations? Well, if it's something extra special, like if you provide something extra special that you feel warrants more, right? Like if you have a certain credential that allows you to supervise interns on that, on that work site that nobody else can provide, maybe there's that extra special component. If you have done your research and you know where you want to live and what that job needs to pay you for you to just pay for cost of living, right? Can you afford it? If you cannot afford to live in that location with what they're offering you, then that's definitely a reason why you would ask for more, because you can't take a job if you can't pay the general bills, right, to live. If you just want more, I mean, you can. It's not always a good leverage to negotiate just because you want more, especially if you're entry level. This is kind of like one of your first entry level positions. It's really hard to say like, well, I want more money just because, right? But if you're a seasoned professional and you have 15 years experience, 20 years experience under your belt, then it's a little easier to maybe ask for more if that worth, right? If you felt like that worth was there because of the experience that you're coming with. What can you negotiate? Now you can negotiate more than just salary, right? So we have salary, right? Your starting salary. Some companies provide stock options, additional vacation time, a sign-on bonus. Now this all depends on industry, right? This is not for everybody. Relocation reimbursement. We had a student that was leaving, needed to go from Chico to LA, was offered the position, but like physically couldn't pay for it. She's like, I'm a college student. Like I can't afford to rent a U-Haul, drive down there with gas money and have enough money for first and last month's rent. So she negotiated, she asked, do you have any relocation fees, to assist with the financial, because I don't have the money for it. And she listed those out. They gave her $15,000, no strings attached. Use it how you need to get to LA. $15,000. And she only budgeted and shared that it would cost her about $8,000 to do that. But they offered her more because they needed her to get down there and they had the resources for that. Alternate start dates, alternate work arrangements. If they're asking you to use your cell phone, is there cell phone reimbursement? There's all different types of things that we can negotiate. And then a little bit of the principles, right? We don't want to take things personally. They're not going to be like, you know what, we don't want to hire you anymore, right? If you're being reasonable about it, That's pretty welcomed. Don't give them ultimatums. Like if you know that you can't afford to take that job with the pay that they're going to offer you, because you've done your research, then don't take it. But know that for yourself, right? And those are things that we can talk about more in the Career Center. Take your time. Hey, I really appreciate this offer. When do you need to know my decision by? Can I have a couple days, or can I have a week to think this over, right? So you can give yourself a little bit more time to think about the offer. And then think about the whole package, right? Think about not just the wages, but are there benefits? Is there health insurance? Are there stocks? Right? So think about the whole package also. And then we ultimately want to avoid trying to give the first number. We want them to try to give the number, because a lot of times they'll say, like, what are you expecting to get paid for in this position? And that happens. People want to know ahead of time what you expect to get out of the job before they offer you a wage. So you always want to avoid giving the first number, and ultimately kind of give a range, or well, I see the cost of living is, and rent would be, and this would be the minimum if you know your minimum. Those are all things, again, if you've done your research and you understand what that looks like for yourself, it's better to understand if there's a leverage or principle to talk about negotiations. All right, I'm just going to put these up here. Just little takeaways for today. Enhance your resume, because that's going to help you understand your strengths. Practice the interview, right? Practice interviewing. Know the organization and company that you're applying to, thank the interviewer, and then just make sure that the job is the best fit for you, because that's most important, right? And that is it. I told you I had a lot of content for you today, and I hope I didn't overwhelm you. But we just have a couple minutes if you have any other questions. And yeah, this will be available for people for recording, and you can find me in the Career Center. Again, my name is Bettina Wildhopper. I don't know that I introduced myself before, in the Career Center, and you can make an appointment with us anytime to specifically look at your situation and what you're wanting for your next step in life.